Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now the Friday Crime Report. Minneapolis, Minnesota, Wednesday, October 23rd, 2024.
It took 5 hours.
Don Sopcak, you are under arrest.
SWAT teams, drones, and a crane.
Take it through the rear door now and follow the commands of officers.
For police to take 54-year-old John Herbert Sopcak into custody after he ultimately surrendered outside his Minneapolis home early this morning. Sopcak was wanted for the attempted murder of his neighbor, Davis Moturi, who he allegedly shot in the neck while Moturi was trimming a tree between their two houses. According to court documents, Moturi had called police on Sopcak 19 times in the last year, alleging his neighbor had threatened to kill him and his wife, brandished a knife at them, and hurled racial slurs.
Stay away from me.
You don't know what you're doing.
Stay away.
Try it again then, tough guy.
Stay away.
You can't throw a punch, can you?
Police say they began surveilling Sopcak after reports of harassment. But even after the shooting, they did not move to arrest Sopcak for several days, citing his mental illness, possession of a firearm, and knowledge of explosives.
We are not going to bust the door down, guns blazing, and get into a deadly force situation. But we will ensure the community will be safe.
As pressure to act ramped up, police say they contacted Sopcak's family to gather information about his mental health issues.
Antonia Hilton joins us in studio. So, Antonia, what happened to that neighbor that is now in custody?
Well, Tom, details about the man are sparse, but prosecutors say in court filings that he's violated restraining orders with neighbors in the past. But right now, it's not clear how he plans to plead or if he's even retained a lawyer.
The man accused of shooting his neighbor in Minneapolis makes his first court appearance today. 54-year-old John Sopcak faces attempted murder and other charges for shooting his neighbor in the neck.
In court today, while arguing bail, Hennepin County prosecutor brought up that Sopcak had a civil commitment in 2016 that expired in 2017, and that 10 people had filed restraining orders against Sopcak in the last 15 years. The public defender saying he denies the current allegations against him and that he has no felony convictions. The victim in this case had filed 19 reports with Minneapolis police regarding Sopcak, Moturi even documenting some of the issues on video. Those reports included vandalism, theft, and threats of violence.
Sopcak had been doing everything that he could to antagonize his neighbors, from putting feces in their mailbox to sounding off horns at night. The police were the first ones to say that this guy had mental problems, and the white media, of course, echoes what the thugs in blue say, but this guy's behavior goes way beyond mere mental problems. As for the tree that had become a bone of contention between them, Mr. Moturi felt that the tree was on his side of the property line, and hence he was within his rights to cut it down. That was when the thug, John Sopcak, ambushed him and shot him, trying to kill him. Moturi's wife had him rushed to the hospital. Mr. Moturi was hospitalized for injuries that included a fractured spine, 2 broken ribs, and a concussion. Miraculously, he survived this race attack. But this was where the real crime began, not by the criminal John Sopcak, but by his accomplices, the Minneapolis Police Department. You see, the MPD decided they weren't going to do anything about this until public outcry built up over the course of nearly a week. And it was 5 days later when they decided to finally do something. Since the suspect in this case was not black, the police decided that rather than storm the place or use any sort of force, they would instead just sit outside of this assailant's home and just ask him politely, would he please come out? I'm not kidding, that's what they did. Now, just a little bit of backstory about this Sopcak character. The victim, Mr. Moturi, had made almost 20 reports to the police about this criminal, and he wasn't the only one. The racist white supremacist thug has a criminal record long as your arm. He had at least 10 different prior restraining orders against him. He also had a history of violent and threatening behavior, with allegations dating back to at least January 2016. He was accused of striking a neighbor with a wooden stick, threatening to harm and kill his neighbors, sometimes while brandishing a knife, and striking a neighbor by throwing something out his window, court records show. In the year leading up to the race attack, Sopcak verbally harassed Moturi on multiple occasions, including using racially charged language during an incident in October 2023 and calling Moturi a black bastard in May. 10 days before the shooting, Mr. Sawchuk stood outside Mr. Moturi's window and pointed a gun at him. Mr. Moturi had previously emailed local officials and the police about his concerns. So what this means is that the local politicians knew all about this. Not just the police, but the local politicians knew about it too. And yet they did absolutely nothing. Gee, I wonder why. We'll find out later. The police allowed this animal to remain on the loose for nearly a week after he tried to murder someone. This is something that doesn't get mentioned nearly enough. So many of these criminals and violent punks running around attacking the black community are deliberately allowed to do so by the police in order to cause problems for the black community in general. People like Sawchuk are the irregular forces of white supremacy, the non-uniformed violent attackers who carry out ambushes that the police feel would be a little bit too risky for them to attempt. Now, this inbred police chief that they got in Minneapolis, he went out of his way to blame the victim and say that this was all Mr. Moturi's fault, blaming him for being shot and almost killed by a violent criminal who the police allowed to remain on the loose. For over a year, they were supposed to get this guy. They didn't do anything. This is not some isolated act. This is the police chief acting as the mouthpiece for the violent white racist criminals who run that city. The fact that he allowed this violent racist to remain on the loose for days on end, that's reason enough for him to be fired and his law enforcement credentials to be stripped and for him to be prosecuted civilly if not criminally. The law-abiding citizen, Mr. Moturi, is being blamed for almost being murdered by a racist white criminal who the police allowed to remain on the loose, and the cops made it a point that they were going to blame him. And the court's giving this animal the opportunity to get bail. Now, this is a racist, violent criminal who has tried to murder at least one citizen that we know of and who has terrorized his neighbors for years on end. And the police are saying, well, he allegedly has mental problems, so we got to go easy on him. And the courts are treating this violent, racist career criminal as if he was charged with just arson or something. He should be held without bail, and it's a no-brainer that this animal should also be facing hate crimes charges. But as of this recording, he's not. As we all know, the judicial system doesn't work based on law, it works based on skin color. Now that brings us to the local authorities. We'll start with the mayor, this Fry character. This is the same moron who was the mayor when George Floyd was murdered. And he's boasting that he's going to stand by the police chief. He said he's not removing the police chief. Of course, this Fry character is going to stand by the cops. He said, you can't simultaneously insist that police officers be de-escalating tense situations and then simultaneously say, right now, you got to bust through those doors with the SWAT team and drag somebody out. You can't have it both ways. Well, first of all, clearly this Fry character is mocking the public. When someone is shooting at citizens and you take 5 days to respond, that's not de-escalation. That's simply refusing to do anything about it. And if this is Mayor Fry's stance on police de-escalation, then I'm sure the next time the Minneapolis police encounter a black citizen who is unarmed, or better yet armed, and accused of shooting at someone, including the police, then I'm sure the mayor is going to agree that there must now be a 5-day period before police will even attempt to arrest this black citizen, and even then the police are going to wait outside the suspect's home for several hours. Because that's the mayor's standard for de-escalation now, right? This is a racist little pustule calling itself the mayor, saying that since this is a white man, they're exercising a hands-off policy, and unless it's a black person, then the police are not going to use force at all. This is them giving the middle finger to the public. They know exactly what's supposed to be done, and what they're saying is there's a 2-tier legal system, and they are the ones who are going to make sure it stays that way. We can be disgusted by the police and the mayor's actions, but we can't be surprised. Mayor Fry was the mayor when George Floyd was murdered. He was publicly humiliated on live TV in front of the whole world and literally forced out of the town square by thousands of people. This was an unprecedented public humiliation for a politician. One that the mayor clearly has never forgotten. He was obviously scarred by it, as he should have been. But that little lesson clearly didn't make the mayor change his ways. Instead, as we see, he has predictably doubled down on protecting the thugs in blue and insulating violent white supremacists from any sort of punishment. The people of Minneapolis failed to remove that mayor after the murder of George Floyd, and this is the inevitable result. White supremacy is lawlessness. And that being the case, white supremacy is the greatest threat to public safety. Instead, this mayor is fighting to keep Minneapolis a safe haven for violent white supremacists. As I've always told you, When you fail to punish white supremacists, you only embolden them. You simply cannot show weakness in the face of evil. You have to get in evil's face to punish it. We'll continue with the moment of truth in just a moment, but first, a word from the official sponsor of Black Empowerment, Power Tools. There's no telling when something's going to come up, so make sure you carry your power tools at all times. You never know when you're going to need to bring the hammer down, or when you'll have some trash that needs to be blown away, or some obstacle that requires cutting down. Don't get caught empty-handed. Keep your hammer close by. Keep that leaf blower at the ready, and always carry your steel. Power Tools. Because no matter what your day job or side hustle may be, there's no excuse for not being ready to put in some work. The thugs in blue love to brag about how they have military-grade equipment and have to make decisions with split-second timing, and yet they didn't bring out their military gear this time. They did nothing at all. And to act like they were waiting for the right time to arrive, that's a lie. They did what they always do whenever there's a suspected armed white assailant in a home. They stand outside, get on their megaphones, and ask pretty please with cherry on top, will you please come out? Now, if this had been Mr. Moturi, who had people calling the police about him, do you think it would have taken them years and years to do something about him? Do you think they would have said, well, we went to his house and we knocked and he didn't come out, so we said we'd come back some other time? If that was Mr. Moturi who had shot someone, would it have taken them 5 days to respond or 5 seconds? If this violent racist thug Sawchuck doesn't have a lawyer, I'm sure that the racist pukes in the Police Benevolent Association will lend him one of their union pimps to represent him. But this is why the city of Minneapolis burned. The police are fully in league with the racist, along with that mayor, and they allowed these criminals to run around committing these crimes. Ever since the uprisings of 2020 in Minneapolis, where the police were literally under siege and they forced the cowards to hide in their own precinct buildings, which, by the way, was yet another humiliation for these scumbags. Now what they're feeling like is they gotta use other means to try to attack the public, like making sure that these violent white supremacists like Sawchuck remain on the loose. Since the police are unable to attack the public as much as they would like to, they're resorting to using these scumbags like Sawchuck to carry out their ambushes for them. But keep in mind, this is happening not in spite of the local authorities, but because of them. The police chief was openly blaming the victim, and he was doing so boldly. He was more concerned with saying that the victim here was at fault than he was to say anything about the violent white supremacists who tried to murder this man. That's how you know this guy was working for the police. But the police chief backtracked on that one real quick, mainly because he knows that the statements that he gave, victim blaming, that's the kind of stuff that can bolster a civil suit against the city, because it goes to bias. Heck, if you find the right lawyer, you might be able to strip the police chief of his qualified immunity for the remarks that he was making. Now, Keith Ellison is still the Attorney General of Minnesota. If nothing else, he needs to be down there talking to the Minneapolis police and letting them know the Justice Department just got through leaving this place and now I'm going to be setting up shop here because of this. He's supposed to be the one looking that police chief in the face and saying, you know what, I'm going to be doing my own review of the Minneapolis Police Department, not just looking at this incident, but a number of others, because when you got a violent white supremacist criminal who you allowed to remain on the loose year after year, you've got all kinds of restraining orders against this guy, you've got open active warrants against this guy, at least 3 of them, and you don't even bother to execute those warrants. This is not a matter of you don't have enough manpower. This is a matter of you see this guy is being useful for what you want him to do. He's doing your dirty work. There need to be cases all around. Keith Ellison's supposed to be doing his job, but he's not. And the reason why is he's playing the game. Far as he's concerned, well, 2020, that was a storm that he had to weather, but now that's behind them and he ain't doing anything. This is the kind of incident that's supposed to bring yet another Justice Department investigation of the Minneapolis police. But then again, we'll have Kamala Harris and others saying, well, if Donald Trump was president, it would be even worse. What? Would he sit there and allow the police to have violent white supremacist thugs on the loose for years on end and not do anything about it? The same way Biden's not doing anything about it? We gotta be smarter than that, family. This is the reason why we have to take personal safety seriously. Instead of people sitting here thinking that the thugs in blue are going to actually be enforcing the law, you need to recognize these criminals for who and what they are. Black people have a right to be safe not merely in public, but even in their own homes, and you don't need to be asking permission or raising your hand to protect yourself. When you know you've got a violent white supremacist thug who is threatening your safety and threatening those you care about, then you have every right to protect yourself and to be ready to protect those that you care about. And as far as the police, you already know that they're going to be taking the side of the white supremacists, which is why so many people hesitate in the face of white supremacist aggression, because they understand that they're not just up against the sawchucks of this world, they're also up against Police Chief O'Hara and Mayor Fry. These guys are all working together. Everybody understands that. These violent white supremacists are not just operating on their own. They are operating as basically the irregular forces of white supremacy. They're carrying out the violent attacks that the Chief O'Haras and the Mayor Frys can't do themselves. Well, when you're up against an organized offense, you require an organized defense. This is where people getting on code comes in, and you gotta be rock solid about that. When a citizen has to defend themselves against the John Sawchucks of the world and the police show up, all of a sudden they've got the SWAT equipment and it didn't take them 5 days to show up, the community needs to circle the wagon around these individuals protecting themselves from white supremacist violence. That is what has to happen. That's gotta be the new normal. That's the highest form of getting on code, when the people are making it very clear we are going to be a law unto ourselves, stopping these violent white supremacists with or without uniforms from carrying out these race attacks. That is how you uphold the law. There is simply no substitute for being ready and able to defend yourself. And when you have these criminals, the thugs in blue, are making it clear that as far as they're concerned, the law is free fire zone against black people, then black people, not just in Minneapolis, but also nationwide, have to make it crystal clear to the racist police chiefs like O'Hara and their scumbag enablers and accomplices like Mayor Fry that if you're going to be protecting these violent anti-black white supremacists, then we are going to be protecting ourselves. And that's this week's Friday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Karen Dorsey, Ronald Waits, Jacques Hargett, Antithesis, and Turk McKenzie. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.